Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met not one, that wasn't truly brilliant at something. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Nikki Kuhn. Nikki Kuhn is a seasoned senior level accessibility designer with over 15 years of experience in the field, with a strong passion for creating inclusive digital experiences. With a strong passion for creating inclusive digital experiences, Nikki has played a pivotal role in enhancing the accessibility of websites, applications, and digital content for numerous organizations. Her ADHD and dyslexia give her a unique insight into the world and compel her to think of the big picture. ADHD and dyslexia also plays into her empathy, which guides Nikki as an intuitive designer. At home, Nikki is the mom of two willful children who teach her new things every day. She's also an avid crafter when she finds the time, DIYer. Welcome, Nikki. Did I get all of that right?
You did. Thank you so much. It sounds so different coming from you too.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody, yeah, they'll make comments to me. Most of my guests, that doesn't even sound like me. Have I done all of those things? Do I do all of those things? So I would love to start with your ADHD diagnoses, if you don't mind, and then we can get into talking about what it is that you do. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually feeling like a real full circle moment to me right now because it was actually your podcast that helped to diagnose me. It was during the pandemic. I was at the time just starting my journey into becoming an accessibility designer, accessibility focused designer, I should say. And I was trying to do everything that I could to learn about accessibility, digital accessibility. And I was joining all of the accessibility communities. And I remember hearing talks about invisible disabilities. And I knew I was dyslexic. It just kind of hit me in that moment that, oh, I've been living with this invisible disability. So I started to learn more about neurodivergence. And I started to get a little bit curious about ADHD. And I've always known people that are ADHD, but I think I've always just kind of put myself on the other end of the spectrum from them. Like, oh, they're so much of this, but I'm the opposite of that. Not quite realizing that we were so similar in many ways. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking for resources, and that's when I came across her podcast, and I listened to episode 100. And by the time I was done with it, I was in tears because I just finally realized that my life made so much more sense. Yeah. And then from there, I pursued a diagnosis because I wanted to explore medication. Again, this was during pandemic time period, so it was very difficult to find something that was local and be able to get diagnosed. Of course, there was a lot of hurdles, like having to call to make an appointment, check up on email, follow back on a voicemail, and it was a lot. So I eventually found several actually organizations that do it online, and I was able to get my diagnosis that way.
So can I ask you, what were some of the symptoms, the things that you always wondered about? Like, why is this so difficult for me? Because I think of symptoms as not the most positive parts of ADHD.
Yeah, I definitely struggle with executive functioning skills. Most certainly, my desk is always cluttered. It is always a organized clutter. I know where everything is. It's my chaos that's in here. I struggle with time, most certainly. I don't like being early to functions either, so I'm always late to them. And I definitely fall into, especially as a creative person, into the focus traps. So if I'm really focused on a project, I will zero in and lose all sense of time. It's also in part why I have my handy dandy timer back here, which helps me to visualize time. Yep. I need that visualization of time because it will pass in an instant for me.
What about emotion? Any problems with emotion, or was that really not one of your symptoms?
I don't know that I've necessarily explored that path yet. I'm sure there is. but I'm still learning all of the intricacies of my neurodivergence too.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah, that's still one I have yet to fully explore.
So, what I'm talking about is emotional dysregulation. So, I tend to think we tend to be people with big emotions, right? So, I always call myself a gusher. When I am excited about something, when I, tried something new and it worked so great, like I am the best spokesperson anywhere because I will stop people on the street so that they know about this thing.
Oh,
Now,
absolutely.
the flip side to that is if I'm not happy, if I'm really not happy, you're going to hear from me too.
Yeah, I think nothing brought that out more than having children and
Yeah.
having two very willful children. So that most certainly has brought out that kind of side of me when things don't, because oh god, there's so moments of such chaos, and just trying to, when you as a mom, just trying to keep everything organized, trying to stay on time, trying not to be late, even though this time it's not you being late, it's your children making you late. All of these things that just kind of add on to kind of the chaos of the moment. And yeah, I have uh, certainly have had many talks about big emotions with my daughter too, who's also really struggling with them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite things that she'll say to me is, "Mom, how am I supposed to know how to do this if you and Daddy can't do this either?" Like,
Yeah.
oh. Yeah, I'm still
Good
learning.
question. Good question.
Yeah.
What about things like rumination and any aspects of rejection sensitive dysphoria in terms of are you sensitive to criticism?
Oh, 100%. And
Yeah.
especially,
What
like
kind
I
of?
said, yeah, as a creative individual too, who, started off in visual design, you're open to visual critiques all the time on your portfolio. And it's something that just happens constantly. So that rejection sensitivity built from a very, young age for me, and then just kind of compounded throughout my career. And as a new entrepreneur, it's something that I'm certainly still working on too, of trying to like move past those moments of when I'm feeling that sensitivity really strongly.
What were you like as a child, Nikki?
Oh gosh, I don't, not a question I thought about in a long time. I was definitely a bright child, happy, um,
No struggle
very
in school.
carefree. Oh no, I struggled with homework. Homework
Ah.
was always my struggle. I was the one that was constantly getting the calls home from school saying, "You have a very smart child, but she
Hmm.
just doesn't do her homework and we can't figure it out, and she's failing now." And
Yeah.
so my entirety of my high school, or the entirety of my schooling, was kind of making up with extra credit assignments.
Hmm. Did you learn how to, well, because you had dyslexia too, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that, yeah, that would make homework even more difficult because not only is it the focus and the boredom and the forcing you to sit down, but then the reading challenges.
Yeah, and the spelling challenges too.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think I might even have some dyscalculia in there too as well, because
Hmm.
it's really difficult for me to do math in my head, but math was one of my best subjects.
Ah,
Um I just, like the pattern recognition of math was something that I really loved and really
yeah.
enjoyed, but I would constantly have mistakes because I would flip over the letters. And then so I would have teachers come back and be like, "Well, I'm following your logic here and you did everything correctly, but you just mixed these two letters here. And then so the outcome of your problem was incorrect."
So I'm curious because you were diagnosed with dyslexia, but it also sounds like you did okay in school. Like you were not a terrible student. And
I
your
got by.
teachers would come to you, right? And they would say, she's really smart.
Yeah.
So they recognized that dyslexia had nothing to do with intelligence.
Yes. Yeah. Or I would say, yeah, for the most part, most of my teachers, yes.
Uh huh.
And there was a time period too where my mom did have me evaluated when I was in school, and they did put me in a special education class.
Mm,
But because I was already kind of in the mainstream classes, I was already so well ahead of all of the other students that they quickly took me out of that. And then they gave me a study hall so that I could do my homework. That was their solution.
Did you continue on with formal education after high school?
So after high school, I went to an art school. So it was very different in the aspect that there wasn't as much focus on essays and math assignments and whatnot. And now is much more focused on the things that I really loved and got excited about. So it was about color theory and, creating these presentations. And those were all things that really got me excited. So even though I still struggled to meet deadlines with my projects, because I no longer had homework, I then had projects I had to work on. Um, it was a much more exciting problem to have.
And you were just naturally really good at all of that stuff, right? I mean,
I would love to think that I was naturally
creative
the
brain.
best designer ever, but no. I was filled in rooms with loads of creative people, but it was something that kept me, um, that I was always naturally inclined to, and something
Uh-huh.
that I was always very interested in. And so, it kept me engaged. And I've spent a career in creative, and I love it.
What changed since you've been diagnosed?
With ADHD,
Yeah.
I feel like it has been a journey of letting go of a lot of shame.
Hmm.
Shame that I've built up over the years, especially as a child, of all these things like, why can't I just be like the normal child or normal adult, normal, anything? Just feeling like I constantly wasn't hitting a mold that I was supposed to belong in. And so I think once I started to learn more about my ADHD and my neurodivergence in general, I think that there was such a relief that came from it that I was able to start to let go of some of those pieces of shame. And it's still a work in progress. Like I'm still discovering certain things that still kind of get so embedded in everything that I do that there's this workup of shame that I'm still letting go of. But like I said, it's been a journey, it's been a process, but I feel like I am a lot more myself these days. And I believe more in myself these days because now I'm kind of more aware of my strengths too. Not just my weaknesses, but I'm kind
Yeah.
of more honed into the strengths that come from it and kind of recognizing when I'm coming up against these hurdles of either, here's kind of my workaround or my tip or trick to kind of work around my brain and the way that it works. Or, you know what? I've got really low energy today and I know I'm just not going to be able to tackle that item. I should just rest, give myself a break, tackle it tomorrow when I'm feeling much better.
I'm curious, when my son was diagnosed with ADHD, we, as his parents, but everybody else too, they saw all of the challenges through this ADHD lens. So everything
Mm,
was ADHD. And he had been telling us since he was 9 years old, I think I have dyslexia.
mhm,
And, dyslexia is on a spectrum like everything pretty much, right? And so you can have a little bit of dyslexia and a lot of dyslexia. And of course, most people saw that, well, but he can read. So that must mean that he doesn't have dyslexia. He didn't really struggle with dyslexia to the level that, if you really have a problem with it. Um, but still, everything was through that lens of ADHD. And then when he was finally diagnosed with dyslexia, and it took 3 times before
mm.
someone actually, we were looking for something else the third time, and that's when he was finally diagnosed with dyslexia. And he has always said that he feels like dyslexia is actually what leads everything. That is more of the struggle than the ADHD. And I'm curious, with you, it was the opposite. So, do you think that because you were diagnosed with dyslexia, that you and maybe everyone else just kind of saw everything through that lens? And so you never even considered that, oh, maybe there's something else. Maybe it's not just dyslexia. And we know now that usually it is something, it's not just one thing.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I do think that having that awareness of the dyslexia within me did stop me wondering if there is something else. And so I did kind of put a lot on both the fact that I was dyslexic and creative. Like I kind of used that as like my crutch for a lot of reasoning of explaining quirks or why I behave certain ways. And I think having that creative label, I think oftentimes I've excused it for other people too. So the dyslexic and creative, I was just able to kind of wrap everything up in that. So I do think that did stop me from wondering if there was anything else out there. And then I think that's also why once I did finally get the ADHD diagnosis, or not even the diagnosis, once I realized that I was ADHD, that's why it was such a huge relief, because the dyslexia alone didn't explain everything. But I do see them as very blended now. Like one of the things that when I'm helping others kind of talking through like neurodivergence or advocating on behalf of neurodivergence, one of the prime examples that I give is when I have to do learning now, especially as an accessibility designer, it's a lot of articles, which means it's a lot of reading. And that wall of text is very hard for me to get through, both from a dyslexic standpoint and an ADHD and like focus standpoint. So one of the things that I love to do is I love to use Microsoft Edge, and I will use their read aloud function, which will highlight the words, which helps me to get through tons of articles when I'm having to do that research. And so, again, I kind of see them as a little bit more blended, just as like a neurodivergent individual of all these kind of hurdles that are kind of blended together, and but finding solutions that work and apply in all aspects.
I have never heard of Microsoft Edge, but I'm just now kind of absorbing what you're saying. So you do this on a computer, I'm assuming. And so the PDF is up, whatever it is that you're trying to read. And can it be a book?
So Microsoft Edge is a browser. So just like Chrome is a browser. And so it is something that is in all Microsoft products, is this read aloud function. So I'm a huge fan of it. It's called Immersive Reader. And you can even customize it. So if you have a child that's learning how to read, you can customize it to highlight vowels or adjectives. There's different customizations that you can do that can help with that learning process. I don't use that. I just use it to help me focus as I'm reading through articles. But there are certainly a lot more products, apps, and that are just coming out now that help with that dyslexic reading. Speechify is another one that helps with. So it's an app that you can do on your phone. Yep. And so there's tons of products that are there today that certainly weren't when I was younger.
What I'm curious about, though, is can you actually use these with a book? And if
Speechify,
so,
you can.
You can. So what do you do? Do you buy the book as a Kindle and then you download it? I guess you could download it. I think I've done this before. You download it as a PDF?
So with Speechify, you can just you can use your phone's camera, and it will pick up on the words there. So you don't even need to have a digital translation of something. With Microsoft Edge, the browser, that will be that's mostly just for anything that's digital content. So if you do have a PDF that has a hyperlink that you're going to, you can use it in that instance. I have not yet tried to do anything with an actual app like Kindle, but I have done it where I've purchased both bundle, where I'm both listening to it and reading it at the same time. So I have done that. Yeah, that
in
definitely
fact,
helps.
if I really love a book, I'm buying the Kindle, I'm buying the physical book, I'm buying the audio book. It is ridiculous. Talk about ADHD tax.
Yeah. But it certainly helps. I know. I do wish that I could do that more. What I have been doing lately is just been doing the audio version while I do a task like dishes. So then I can still stay focused to what is, in my ear, and then have something that I'm doing at the same time in order to keep me occupied.
My favorite thing for nonfiction books, because that's all I read. I've tried to read fiction. I don't know. I have this Ann Patchett book that what is it? Tom's Lake. Like everybody's raving about it. I got like through maybe half and it's still sitting. I just cannot And it's probably because I have 50,000 nonfiction books all over the place, usually about the brain, right? But one of the things that I love is if you download it on your Kindle and then you connect your Kindle to Readwise, you can literally highlight on your Kindle, because I want to remember the stuff. It's nonfiction, right? And I have no working memory. So you highlight it on your Kindle, and then it automatically, when you sync, it automatically sends all your highlights to Readwise, creates a PDF, and you can download that.
Oh, interesting.
So that I can then go back and say, okay, this is what I learned from this book, right?
Yeah.
And I can actually apply it. And what's even better is I set it up where on Readwise, I send an email to myself. It used to be twice a day. That's too much. I now send it to myself at 3 p.m. And it goes through all of the books I've read, all of the highlights I've done, and it'll just give me one from each. So it kind of keeps the book in my brain. I mean, sometimes I'm so busy, I just delete, right? But most of the time I'll go in there and I'll just kind of skim the highlights, and it'll help me to remember, oh yeah, that's what you learned from this book. And that was this book it was about. I love it.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that. Yeah, although anything coming into my emails, that's a scary place for me. That is definitely the ADHD too. My email is hard. Place.
If you want to make sure that you get to me, you've got to go to my email, because all of the DMs all over the place and the texts and that is the thing that I just no, can't do it.
I feel like these days I am over communicated, and I'm struggling to keep up with everything.
Well, and I prefer to talk and respond. But what happens is, so someone will DM me. I mean, I get so many of these every single day, and they tend to be really long because it's, what's been going on with them. And, they always start out, I found you in the book. I found you in the podcast. So I've got to respond. I have to say something, right? It's so kind of them to take the time, but it is just overwhelming to read all that and then to have to respond and write. And so what I do is I just shoot them an audio message back.
Oh,
and usually it's too long. Right. And so then they'll shoot me an audio message back, and I'm like, no. I can send the audio message, but I can't listen to someone else's audio message. And thankfully now on a lot of these, I know if it comes through on text or if it comes through on Voxer, they'll transcribe it. So at least you can skim that, transcription. But it's so funny how you have these ways that you want to communicate that work for you. But then if someone comes back and tries to do that to you, you're like, wait, that's too much.
Oh, absolutely. Or I'll just have really energetic days and I'm like, I'm ready to tackle it all. And I'll do all of the responses, and then I'll get all of the feedback back. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, now I'm not ready to... Now I'm not ready to receive that.
Especially when you get the feedback back really fast and you're like, no. This is against the rules. I'm going through my email. You're out of here. You're out of here for a couple days.
It's too soon. I'm just doing responses right now. I can't respond to the response. No,
yes, you're ruining my system. You're giving me more work.
Yep. And God forbid I get taken out of my task, because then I'm not going to go back to it.
Oh my gosh. So, the way I found you is I believe you actually sent me a message, right, Nikki? Yeah.
I did. And I had to work through a lot of rejection sensitivity in order to even write that.
Well, so and I initially read it and I'm like, accessibility. Oh my God, that sounds so boring. No, what are we going to talk about accessibility? That sounds boring. And then I went to your website and I just loved how you presented it.
Oh,
it was so clean and simple and visually beautiful. And
that means
I
so much to me.
Read what you were writing, and I was like, oh my gosh, this would be a great subject to talk about. It's so fascinating and so interesting, and that's what I want to get into. But let's start with, how did you get involved in the field of accessibility? What makes you decide that this is what I want to do?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't a conscious decision as I was kind of starting off in my career. As I said, I started off as a creative individual. I was a visual designer, and I was a founding designer at a financial institution. And I just found that early on in my career, there was certainly accessibility nodes that kind of came in really early. Like I had people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, Nikki, my old eyes, I can't read this. You know, the font isn't legible. We need to fix this." And I'm like, "Okay." So I started to become more aware of certain aspects. And then I had another peer come up to me and tell me that he was colorblind. And so, therefore, he couldn't understand the data visualizations that I was putting together. And that really
Mm.
struck me. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's, we need to fix that. And so, I feel like there early on in my career, I was made aware of certain things, and I considered myself to be quite an accessible designer. And then as I transitioned in my career, I moved into the user experience space, and I was a consultant with Accenture. And I had a variety of different client projects and whatnot that I was working on. And I would work a lot with different ADA teams. And so that started to get me more aware of things to pay attention to and how to be a better, my opinion, how to be a better designer, to be more inclusive. But it wasn't until I had a project where I was working on an accessible payment kiosk, which needed to be both accessible from a hardware perspective and a software perspective. So
Mm.
if somebody is coming in a wheelchair, and they need to be able to reach the buttons accordingly. So everything needs to be at a certain height. And as did the software that I was producing. And during that time, the ADA team that I was working with had actually disabled people working with them. And so I got to
Mm.
learn a lot from um, a blind coworker who really opened up my eyes into what needs to be there in order to be accessible. And from that moment forward, it was a pivotal moment in my career, and I had to learn everything. And I think that might be the dyslexia, where I can't just learn a small part of it and
Yeah.
feel that I'm fulfilled. I had to learn everything about digital accessibility in order for me to feel comfortable as an accessibility designer. So I am now a certified professional in web accessibility.
It's so interesting to me that we kind of come at everything from who we are and where we are. So
Absolutely.
there's this idea that if it works for me, it'll work for everybody. And that is so not true, right?
No, no, none whatsoever. Although I will
However,
say, I realized now that as somebody who is neurodivergent, I have been designing intuitively for cognitive disabilities pretty much my entire career. Just because I would pick out the fonts that looked good to me and didn't wear my eyes out after a while because I'm dyslexic. Or if I was working on instructional text and it was just paragraphs of text, I'd be like, oh, I can't read this. I need to fix this. And so
yeah.
just intuitively, there were things that I would do throughout my career that I didn't realize why I was doing it. But now I know that it was from that cognitive disability perspective.
And what's crazy about that is we have this idea that if it works for me, it'll work for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is so not true. But like you were just talking about, when we fix things like the big walls of text
Right.
for people like us who struggle with big walls of text, guess what? It becomes better and more readable and for everyone. And isn't that what we ultimately want?
Absolutely. You are basically circling around my favorite motto, which is accessibility benefits all. Is that when we fix these things to make them more perceivable for people, because we're not just thinking about one disability when we're designing for inclusivity, right? We're designing for them all. We're designing for audio, visual, um, physical, and for cognitive disabilities. So when we're considering all of these different aspects and the way in which people perceive and consume content, we're really just trying to make it so that we're making it more flexible for everyone to be able to understand. And so when we do start to implement these things, yeah, it benefits all people. And I love to talk about, again, I'm going to bring up Microsoft, but they have something called their Microsoft Inclusive Design, and they have this amazing um, infographic that I saw when I was first learning about accessibility that talks about how we think of disability as these permanent disabilities, but there's also temporary disabilities and situational disabilities. And so there might be somebody who's blind, who cannot see the content in front of them and relies on a screen reader. But then you might also have somebody who's just coming back from an eye doctor appointment, who has the eye drops in their eyes. And so therefore, they're not going to be able to see right for a couple hours. In that span, they're going to experience similar challenges. And then you also have the situational disabilities, which could be if you're driving and all of a sudden the sun's in your eyes. So there's this idea that when we design for disabilities, we're really going to benefit all of those people during that time.
Yeah. When I was younger, I had the best eyesight, like hawk. And, didn't need glasses for anything. I just assumed that, and I remember my husband, when we were first married, he wanted a lamp by a chair. And I'm like, aesthetically, did not like that, right? And I remember it's just like, well, what's the problem? What do you need that light for? Like, just obnoxious. Ultimately, he got the light in the second house. But what I realized is that I could read anything. I could read the fine print on the back of the, stupid ibuprofen bottle that nobody could read. I could read in the dark. And as I've gotten older, because I never had glasses for anything at all, I need them for readers now.
I think I got it right.
But anyway, because my eyesight was so good and I never had to correct for anything, that means that reading things now for me, I am literally blind as a bat without readers. And an eye doctor explained it to me. I'm farther away from the zero and I'm not able to move back to the middle, but I know that it's much, much worse for me. And so if I am in a restaurant and the lighting is even a little bit dim and I don't have my readers, I literally, I have to get people to read the menu for me. It is so bad. And so now I get really upset, when I see something and I can't read the print. And sometimes even with my glasses, I can't read it. And my first thought is that was designed by an effing 20-year-old, right? Or a 30-year-old or whatever. It makes me so angry because I'm like, this is ageist. But at the time, didn't have a clue. Wouldn't even, was upset that my husband wanted to get this certain lamp by the side of a chair. We kind of know what we need and we can't understand why anybody else would need more. And so now I look at my website and I'm really panicked about it after reading your website. And I'm thinking, what do we do as business owners who own these websites to make them, I don't want to say compliant, but just easier for anybody who wants to come into our arena and know what it is that we do. And I have so much on my website that is informational, right? I want people to have this information. Where do we start? What do we do? I feel terrible about this. I didn't even know this was the thing.
Yeah. Well, you're not alone. And I think that that's a big part of my advocacy too, is just bringing more awareness and education to accessibility, because it's not a sexy topic. It's not something that people get very excited about. And I use that term just because that is the term that has been surrounded by me throughout my entire career of, make the logo sexier or whatnot. And trust me, I've heard it. I've heard it all.
Right.
And accessibility isn't one of those that makes people excited. And it's really hard advocating on behalf of it when you're an individual within a corporation too. I've spent years burning myself out trying to do that when you're trying to advocate from bottom up. And it's oftentimes the first thing that gets deprioritized, which is unfortunate, of course, is so needed for all the reasons that you described. And so it is a really hard subject to approach people with. And so I am hoping by bringing more awareness to it, to what it actually is, that folks will start to pay attention more. And it is hard because even to be compliant, you have to abide by the WCAG guidelines. And the way that they are written, especially for somebody who's neurodivergent, is extremely technical. And and very daunting. And there's so much room for interpretation, which is, again, part of the reason why I needed to learn everything about them so that I can understand that and I can interpret it. Um, One of the things that I'm hoping to do is I'm just starting off in my entrepreneurship journey, but I am hoping to consult more businesses to be able to help them to be more compliant and use best practices so that they are being more inclusive. I'm also trying to build out more educational materials too, so that folks can actually understand how they themselves can be more accessible and more inclusive with the way that they're doing their designs. But say just a few tidbits for things that to keep an eye out for. Most importantly, I from every perspective is to make sure that anything that is interactive on your website that you can tab to with your keyboard. So having that keyboard accessibility is extremely crucial for assistive technologies. And
I
so
don't even
if
know what
you're
that means.
so if you need to if you are don't have the physical capabilities of being able to access a computer the way that a typical individual would, which would be with a mouse and a keyboard, um, let's say, or even let's going to go back to that chart that I was talking about before of having a temporary disability. When I first read that chart, it was during the pandemic, and I had a newborn that I was breastfeeding while working full time. So
Hmm.
I constantly had a baby in my arm while I was using my other arm to do my work. At
Hmm.
that time, I only had one hand to work with. So I would need to tab through websites in order to be able to get through things, or even my programs that I was working with, because I was now one hand less. So just imagine then if you had another disability that didn't allow you to access a computer or a laptop in the same way that you normally would. And so this could be either they have something called a sip and puff. So that's when there is like an attachment that comes out that you actually use, like basically like sucking motion in order to move through a website. And so that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about assistive technologies. There's tons of assistive technologies that are out there, but they're all different ways that help disabled individuals to navigate through, a website or an app, so that they can do it on their own. They can have that independence and not have to rely on other people or call in to find out about something. It's about having that equal access. And so one of the first steps to ensuring that your website or app is going to work for assistive technologies is just by making sure that it's keyboard accessible. So again, that's tabbing through your website, and if everything that is interactive, any button, any link, if you can tab to it, if there's a focus to it, then you're already like one step ahead of the game.
So if I don't know what you're talking about, does that mean that mine likely does not is not compliant?
Not necessarily. You can. Well, I think it depends too on how you've created your site, who was working on it, the level of information. If it was a software engineer that you were working with, the level of information and education that they were aware of. That could have been things that they just did automatically, and and there are even certain web building apps that inherently are more
Mm.
accessible. So they do have some of these features built into it. But just because there are things that are inherently more accessible doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be accessible. There's still a lot of considerations. Another one would be color. So I think you had mentioned before of being very frustrated about having that text that is hard to read. Oftentimes that's because the color doesn't meet the proper color contrast. And so
Hmm.
that's a really big one, especially from a design perspective, of making sure that you have the right colors to work with, first and foremost, so that you can have that proper contrast, so that if somebody has a visual disability, that they're able to still interpret that information. And then if I'm on my phone and I'm out in the sun, then I can still read that text too.
Yeah. So you use the term compliant, so that would
Mhm.
indicate to me that there's some sort of legal framework behind it. Is is this the law that websites have to be compliant?
So there's definitely a lot of laws and regulations that are out there globally around accessibility. Here in the United States, we do have the American with Disabilities Act. What is unfortunate about the way that it works here in the United States is that you have to, it's basically on the disabled individuals to sue that company in order for that to be enacted, basically. So there are plenty of examples out there. Domino's is a big one that we use in the accessibility community because they got sued more than once.
Mm.
So even if you gotten sued, or if you've previously been sued, it does not keep you from not being sued again. You still
If you've
need to
been
make
sued
sure they
one
take
time,
notes.
wouldn't it stand to reason that, I mean, wouldn't it be cheaper to actually maybe fix your website? Don't you think?
100%, but you'd be surprised how often that logic does not does not make it to the top. And I've also, the more that I've been in conversations, the more that I've found about like companies who also set aside a budget so that they can just take care of that cost of the lawsuit versus having to actually fix anything. But if you do pay attention to accessibility, if you do incorporate it into your culture of your company, because it's not just important to make sure that your customers have equal access, it's
Yeah.
kind of
Or
important to
that
make
you're
sure
not
that you're,
breaking the law, right? That you're actually, I mean, well, I don't know how much more it can cost. I'm just thinking of a company like Domino's. To me, it's
yeah.
ridiculous that there wouldn't be a line item in their budget to make sure that that is addressed.
I'm pretty
Um,
sure there is now.
yeah,
And there's been more and more companies that have been sued. So you even see some bigger companies that are now starting to build out accessibility departments, which is great. It's wonderful. But then this has also been a really trying time in the tech community. So you also see them all getting laid off as well. It's been interesting. It's definitely still not the most exciting of places to advocate from behalf of, but there's a reason why it's needed, and it's needed in every industry.
so you're saying that that this is the law, and all websites need to have a certain level of accessibility. But probably, if someone who is struggling with a website is going to sue anyone, they're going to sue someone with deep pockets. So they're going to go for the big companies. But anybody can be sued.
Yes, yes, but I know that there's some. I'm forgetting at the moment. It's been a while since I've been tested on this, but I know that there's
Sorry.
some. Yeah, like I do remember at least like so in Canada, there's the Ontario Accessibility Act, something along those lines, and of course my dyslexia never allows me to remember all of the acronyms either. But I know. I remember very specifically that it was like a certain size and up, or a certain amount of employees and up. I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember specifically what it is in the United States, at least not off the top of my head. But yeah, there you are liable to be sued if you're not creating accessible experiences. But then again, that's putting it very much on the side of the person who's experiencing that, which is kind of
Yeah.
unfortunate that it's not just more um, that it's not being taught more in schools, and that there's not more education around it within just corporate environments.
So when you're talking about people with ADHD, let's start with them. What are some of the things that you think about that make a website more accessible to us?
I'm immediately going to think about forms specifically. So when you're filling out a form, just making sure that you're it's well informed, so that you're explaining to the user exactly what they should expect by filling out this form, what should happen when they hit the submit button, that you're not causing that anxiety of like, I don't know what I'm doing, or that frustration of this doesn't make sense. All of your labels in your forms need to actually have a label. So all of your input fields, making sure that they have a label, and not just and not one that gets hidden as soon as you start typing. I see that frequently, where first name, and then you start typing in Nikki, and then all of a sudden that first name label disappears. Now, if you walk away and then come back and have no idea what it was that you're filling out, you have no way of informing the user then like what it is that they need to know. Again, there's greater reasons from an accessibility perspective of why that should be there too, but from an ADHD perspective, that could also cause some anxiety too. And then error handling too. Again, if you have an error, making sure that you're informing your user what the error is and how to fix it, and not just some code language of there's like a 504 error here. That's probably not. I don't know what that is, but whereas something that I don't know why the error is occurring and I don't know how to fix it, that's going to cause me anxiety. It's going to cause me frustration, and I'm just going to abandon the task that I'm working on.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking also having a way to double check that email, because that is one of the things that we get more emails about is this, basically what ultimately happened, why they didn't get what they wanted to get, is they gave us the wrong email address. And so as you're speaking, I'm thinking, there should be, how sometimes you fill out a form and you put the email in one time and then you put it in a second time. And if it doesn't match, it'll call it out.
You can also have that input field coded so that it does the autocomplete, which is also a very great accessibility feature to have in there, which is also part of the WCAG criteria, that if you allow that autocomplete, then if you have that email saved, it's one less thing that I have to type in.
Yeah.
And then one less thing that I can type in incorrectly. Again, as a dyslexic person, if I have to type in my email, or even my pet, I get so, I hate it every single time. Yeah. As soon as there's that autocomplete, I'm like, oh, thank God. I don't have to worry that I didn't type in my own name incorrectly, because I have misspelled my own name.
Yeah. I would also think big walls of text, right, would be another one. And what is so helpful about that is we have to know our message. And what better way to really hone in on our message than to cull through all of that and make it so simple and so understandable? And why wouldn't that benefit everyone? We should be doing that, right?
Absolutely.
We shouldn't make people go through all that text.
The idea of user experience in general is that you don't want users to have to think. Is the least amount of mental load that you can put on a user in order to go through their experience is what our ideal is, right? We want the best user experience for all people. And as an accessibility focused designer, I want the best user experience for all people. And so, the less that you have to think, the more that you can have someone just skim through the information and be able to pick out the important parts, bolding and not bolding everything, because the moment that you bold everything, then nothing is bolded.
It's nothing.
Exactly. And using it very sparingly and when it's important, because then using techniques and using these kind of things cohesively and consistently. So if you're always bolding certain things, then I start to learn as I'm going through your app, your website, I look for the bold part because that's where XYZ is. And so it allows you to kind of go through an experience more seamlessly.
So what do people need for dyslexia?
So I've already mentioned a few things, but I'll pull out another one. Iconography too. Iconography can be used, is wonderful for dyslexic individuals.
Iconography, what is that?
Yeah, so just using icons in your designs. Yeah, so if you just have all text everywhere for somebody who's dyslexic, it's going to take a lot more time for me to process the information. But if you have, and this is why I say proper usage of iconography, if you have a home icon when you're going home, well, that's going to be very easy for me to understand without even reading the text that's where to go. I don't want everyone just to use icons as an accessibility designer. I also want labels there too, but from a dyslexic standpoint, having things color-coded and using icons is wonderful for me to help divvy up a page and understand from a visual standpoint where my attention should go. And if something And I know that, again, there's many different types of processing information, so not everybody is going to feel that way. But from a dyslexic standpoint, when I have things color coded, it makes things so much easier. But you have to also keep in mind those that are colorblind, color coding isn't going to work out perfectly. So if you use icons plus that,
Hmm.
then you're serving for both individuals. And as a dyslexic individual, having both icons and colors actually benefit me as well.
What about for someone who struggles with audio, with sound? Either they're deaf, or their hearing just isn't good.
Yeah, one of my favorite disability advances, closed captions, transcripts, making sure that anytime that you have something that is displayed in audio format, that you also have a text format of it too. So this is what I was referring to earlier, where I was saying that you want to make sure that you have that you're giving people many different ways of inputting your information. So if you do have something that's a video, make sure that there's closed captions that are included, and even better if you have closed captions plus transcripts. Because then if the transcripts helps in a variety of different ways and for a variety of different users. And it also, if I have a transcript, back to your point earlier of when you're trying to communication overload and you don't have the time to go through something, as a user just looking through a transcript, that makes it very easy for me to skim and see where I want to hone in on. So maybe I don't want to watch an entire YouTube video. I just want to get to this one point. But if I have a transcript, I have an idea of where to go.
I just I use Harper AI, not all the time because I forget about it, but I just got an email from them, and they now have the capability. They probably had it for a while and I just didn't realize it. They can go into a YouTube video, or they can go into your email, and you can literally, they'll read your email and then they'll put together an outline
Oh,
of
I
what
need
was in the
this.
email. Yeah. I
I
was
need
like,
this.
oh my God. Especially when you get those, literally block long, emails where it's 3 pages long and there's not one paragraph.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Which,
I was just
that
saying I
is an
wanted AI for
ADHD
my
thing.
email. Yeah.
I get so many ADHD women, certainly my students, who that is how they communicate, and they're brilliant and they have so much to say and they're actually amazing writers. But if you get an email or, a white sheet or whatever, anything that is literally just blocks of text and no paragraphs, nobody's going to read your brilliant work, right? But I just love that whole idea because we're big picture people.
Yeah.
So I can then put the email through this AI. It gives me an outline. Then I've got the big picture, and then I can go back in if I need
I
to,
love
right?
that.
To
Yeah.
hone in on certain areas. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of bad about AI, but I think for the ADHD brain, probably the dyslexic brain too, it is life changing.
I have used it quite a bit. And yeah, I've even used it to help summarize articles that I've read,
Yes.
because I was struggling in that, I was struggling with focus at that time. And so I was having a hard
Mm-hmm.
time. All my other tricks weren't working. So I used AI for that. Yeah, I've got a lot of uh, both excitement and fear all around AI, because
Right.
it's I don't know, I feel like we're living in a black hole or a black mirror episode. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't really know where it's going to end up. But
yeah,
at this point, I know that it makes a big difference in my life to give me the big picture.
yeah.
It also makes a big difference for me to start. So I
Mhm.
can vomit in a bunch of information, tell it to organize it for me, create an outline, right? And then I can
Exactly.
go back in and re-edit.
Yeah.
It's so helpful to start.
Starting point. Yes, I
Mhm.
use AI constantly just for that starting point. I don't know how to respond to this email because my brain just doesn't want to think like that right now. Or I don't,
Yeah.
like I was thinking about ideas for different keynote speaking topics, and I was blanking. So I kind of use it as like a way to brainstorm and to get
Yeah.
started. Hmm.
It helps us process. It's almost
Yes.
like you have someone there, to help you process
Yeah.
your thoughts.
Hmm.
And, that's the problem. Or that's not a problem. That's what is brilliant about our brains, all of the thoughts. The problem becomes then synthesizing them and figuring out, okay, which one am I going to go with, right?
Yes. Well, depending on the mood. Sometimes sometimes I'm taking on the world and I'm able to tackle them all at once.
Yeah. What do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
Honestly, for me, it has been giving myself more grace and really believing in my strengths more. Because, like I said, not knowing that I was ADHD for so long of my life and not having that understanding, there was so much of this shame that just built up over time that I, couldn't quite get through. So now having that understanding, that's something that I always talk about with friends, or even just from an advocacy standpoint, of kind of being able to let go of that shame and give myself more grace, especially when I'm struggling with certain things, that, it's okay that I'm struggling with this, because there are other really amazing aspects that, I bring into this world too. I just either find other individuals that can help lift me up because I struggle with something, or other technologies like AI, like I'm struggling to start, let me have that kind of that help along the way. And it has, yeah, I think even just understanding my ADHD has allowed me to seek out more help too, in ways that I never would before.
Do you have a number one ADHD workaround?
I think this is probably something I've learned from you too, but something I constantly think about is the STAR concept of rewarding myself. When I don't want to work on a task, or there's something that I'm really struggling with, like, all right, what's going to be that dopamine fix at the end of it? What's the reward that I can give myself? If I do this, then allow myself that. And then I think it's been really crucial to, again, as somebody who's starting off in my entrepreneurship journey, like, learning how to celebrate my wins is something that is so hard for me to do. And so I am trying to focus more on that celebration. And that's also kind of giving me that star and that dopamine as well.
Nikki, are you working on something that you want to tell us about?
Well, yeah, I think I've touched on it a bit already, but I'm now an entrepreneur. I'm on my own. I'm doing accessibility consulting because I want to be more impactful than what I was able to be as a corporate employee. So I am now doing this on my own, and I want to be able to help out more companies to be more inclusive and more accessible in in their digital content. And as I'm just starting off and getting through a lot of rejection sensitive dysphoria, I'm trying to do more. So I'm going to say this now so that I have to hold myself to it. This is also my other ADHD hack of making myself accountable. But I'm going to be writing more articles about accessibility. And I've even started a TikTok so that I can start to talk more about this and help to inform others on ways that they can be more accessible.
So where can they find you? Where can they find the TikTok? And if they want to get a hold of you, website, all of it?
Yeah, so my website is Scallywag. That is with two ones instead of an L. So that is A11Y is an abbreviation for accessibility, just so that folks out there know that.
Okay, wait a minute. I didn't get that at all. Okay, so what is it?
So A11Y is an abbreviation for accessibility. The reason why that
A11Y?
Yep. And so the reason why is that there's 11 letters in between A and Y, and accessibility is a really hard word to spell. So in the accessibility community, we use Ally A11Y
Right,
as our abbreviation.
Oh my God. Okay, so that's brilliant. So it's literally, it looks like Ally, but it's actually A11Y. And
Correct.
that's your handle
So mine
on
is
TikTok?
Scallywag, but instead of
Oh,
the
like
L's,
that's not a
the
hard
ones.
word to spell. What?
So
Okay, spell it. Spell
yes,
the whole thing.
SCA11 YWAG.
Okay.
Scallywag.com.
And so is that your
And then
email as well? I mean, your website as well?
my website is www.scallywag.com. That's my website.
Okay.
And then on TikTok, I am Captain Scallywag. spelled the same way.
Okay.
And then I'm active on LinkedIn as well. And so my name is Nikki, Nikki, Kuhn, Kuhn. Or also you can follow my company, Scallywag.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's a very cute name. Now I'm
Well,
starting to get
thanks.
it all. And this will all be in the show notes if you're confused and you're trying to find out how to, figure out how to find Nikki. Nikki, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. You are such a delight.
Thank you so much. Like I said, this is a full circle moment for me. So I am above the moon. This is my dopamine and my star for the year.
Oh, I love to hear that. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Nikki, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week.